Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let me tell you a story.
The first person to stop clapping was Maria, not because she already knew what James was about to say, because she suddenly realized he had been drinking confidence all evening. The kind of confidence that makes people say things they can never take back. The rooftop restaurant overlooking Biscayne Bay glowed with expensive lights. Music floated through the air. Waiters moved between tables carrying champagne and desserts. It was supposed to be a celebration. James had just closed the biggest business deal of his career. Everyone in the room knew it. Business partners were shaking his hand. Old friends were patting him on the back. Someone had even called him the future king of Miami real estate. James loved every second of it. He stood near the center of the room, with a glass raised high. "You did it, man! This deal changes everything. You've officially made it." The compliments kept coming. Maria sat at their table, smiling politely. She had heard these conversations for years. Every new success, every bigger contract, every celebration. She had been there for all of them. She remembered when there had been no rooftop parties, no expensive suits, no luxury watches. Back then, success looked different. It looked like the two of them sitting on the floor of their first apartment, eating takeout because they couldn't afford proper furniture. Back then, James would grab her hand and say, "One day we're going to have everything." And she believed him, because she never cared about having everything. She only cared about having him. A waiter stopped beside their table. "Another glass of wine, ma'am." Maria smiled. "No, thank you." At the front of the room, James tapped his fork against his glass. The soft ringing sound spread through the restaurant. Conversations stopped. People turned toward him. A few guests lifted their phones, ready to record another victory speech. James grinned. He looked happy. No, he looked untouchable. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Applause followed. He nodded. "I couldn't have done any of this without the amazing people around me." More applause. Maria smiled again. She had heard this speech before. Then James took a sip of champagne. His expression changed. He looked around the room as if he had one more announcement to make. "I've also been doing a lot of thinking lately." The room became quiet. "I think success changes people." A few guests nodded. "I think growth changes people, too." Maria looked at him. Something in his voice felt different. "I've spent the last few years building a life that I love." He paused. "And sometimes," he laughed softly, "sometimes you realize you've outgrown certain things." A few people chuckled. Nobody knew where he was going. James turned toward Maria. She felt every eye in the restaurant shift with him. Then he said it. "I've outgrown my marriage." Silence. Real silence. The kind that makes people forget to breathe. A woman near the bar slowly lowered her glass. Someone coughed. One of James's friends stared at him as if he had misheard. Then a nervous laugh escaped from one of the tables. Another followed. Not because anyone thought it was funny. People laugh when they don't know what else to do. James kept smiling. He thought he had said something brave. Maria looked at him. She didn't blink, didn't move, didn't react. James continued. "Maria is a wonderful person, but we want different things now." Nobody spoke. He took another drink. "My life is changing." More uncomfortable silence. "I need someone who understands this new world." A man sitting nearby suddenly became interested in his napkin. A woman across the room looked away. Everybody could feel the embarrassment. Everybody except James. He was still smiling, as if he had just announced a promotion, as if he expected applause. Maria slowly placed her hand on the table. She looked at her husband, the same man who used to bring her coffee in bed, the same man who once danced with her in their kitchen because the electricity had gone out and they couldn't watch television, the same man who had once whispered, "I'll never stop choosing you." She remembered all of it, every promise, every late-night conversation, every dream they built together. And suddenly, she felt something surprising. Not anger, not heartbreak, not even shock. Just clarity. A strange, peaceful clarity. Because for the first time in months, everything made sense. She picked up her wine glass. The room watched her. Some people looked worried. Others looked sorry for her. A few expected tears. One person even reached for a napkin. Nobody was prepared for what happened next. Maria stood. She lifted her glass toward James. Then she smiled. A calm, beautiful smile. Congratulations on your victory. You could have heard a pin drop. James blinked. The smile on his face weakened. For the first time all night, he looked confused. Because that wasn't the reaction he expected. He expected questions. He expected crying. Maybe even an argument. But Maria simply looked at him the way someone looks at a chapter they have already finished reading. Then she placed her glass down, picked up her purse, and walked away. No drama. No shouting. No tears. Just footsteps. Slow. Steady. Certain. Every person in that restaurant watched her leave. And not one of them knew the truth. Not one of them knew that months earlier, Maria had already begun preparing for this night. Every important document had been copied. Every investment had been organized. Every account had been reviewed. Every protection she needed was already in place. She had quietly moved everything important out of reach. Because love had taught her many things. But experience had taught her one lesson her grandmother never allowed her to forget. Never let love make you forget your value. James raised his glass again. People slowly started clapping. A few did it out of politeness, others because they didn't know what else to do. He thought he had won. He had no idea the game had already ended. And he was the last person to realize it. If you've ever seen someone underestimate a quiet person, leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. George Stories, because tonight's lesson might change how you see love, marriage, and success forever. Welcome back to Mr. George Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button, because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. Because tonight's story begins with a man celebrating his greatest victory, and a woman quietly walking away with something far more valuable. The elevator doors closed. For the first time that evening, Maria was alone. The soft music from the rooftop restaurant disappeared. The applause disappeared. James's voice disappeared. Only the faint hum of the elevator remained. She looked at her reflection in the mirrored wall. Her makeup was still perfect. Not a single tear. She let out a slow breath. Then something unexpected happened. She smiled. Not because she was happy, and not because the end of a marriage was easy. She smiled because there was nothing left to fear. For months, she had been carrying a quiet weight in her chest, a feeling she couldn't explain. Every time James canceled dinner, every time he answered emails while she spoke, every time he looked through her instead of at her, she had felt it. The marriage was changing. No, the marriage had already changed. Tonight simply gave it a name. The elevator doors opened into the hotel lobby. A young employee standing near the entrance gave her a polite smile. "Have a wonderful evening, ma'am." Maria smiled back. "You too." Her voice didn't shake. She stepped outside. Warm Miami air greeted her. Palm trees moved gently in the night breeze. Across the street, people laughed as they walked toward nearby restaurants. Cars passed. Music drifted from a rooftop bar. The city kept moving, as if nothing had happened, as if her husband hadn't just announced the end of their marriage in front of dozens of people. She stood there for a moment, then reached into her purse. Her phone buzzed. A message. One of her cousins. "Dinner at Grandma's on Sunday. Don't forget." Maria looked at the message for several seconds. A small laugh escaped her. Life really was strange. A family dinner was still happening. The city was still awake. People were still falling in love somewhere. Children were probably begging their parents for ice cream. And up on that rooftop, James was celebrating. The world had not ended. It had simply changed direction. She began walking toward the valet stand. "Good evening, ma'am." The young man handed her the keys. She thanked him and walked toward her car. As she reached for the door handle, another memory returned. Her grandmother's voice, clear as day. "Baby, people show you who they are in little ways before they show you in big ways." At the time, Maria hadn't understood. She did now. The little ways, the forgotten anniversaries, the missed conversations, the late nights, the way James stopped asking her opinion, the way he started making decisions alone, the way he stopped saying "we" and started saying "I." Tonight wasn't sudden. It was simply the loudest thing that had happened in a long time. She sat in the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. Instead, she rested her hands on the steering wheel. The silence felt different, peaceful, almost comforting. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was James. She stared at the screen. She didn't answer. A second call came immediately. Then a third. She placed the phone face down. He could wait. He had ignored her feelings for months. A few minutes would not hurt him. She leaned back in her seat. Then she laughed softly, a quiet little laugh, because she suddenly remembered something. 3 months earlier, she had asked James to have dinner with her. He had promised. She cooked his favorite meal, set the table, lit candles. He never came home. Later that night he sent a text. "Sorry, business dinner." She had eaten alone. That was the night she opened their files and began organizing everything. Not because she planned to leave. Not because she wanted revenge. She simply needed clarity. If their marriage was changing, she needed to understand where she stood. And what she found surprised her. There were investments James barely remembered, properties he had forgotten, agreements he had signed without reading. She had spent years organizing every detail of their financial life. She knew where everything was. She knew what belonged to whom. She knew exactly what protections existed. At first, she simply reviewed everything. Then she started making copies. Then she placed important papers somewhere safe. Not because she expected tonight, but because she believed something her grandmother had taught her. Hope for the best. Prepare for the unexpected. Maria finally started the car. The radio came on automatically. The love song was playing. She immediately turned it off. "Not tonight," she said softly. She pulled out of the parking lot. Miami's skyline stretched ahead of her. Beautiful lights, reflecting on the water. She remembered driving these same streets years ago with James. Back when he would roll the windows down and sing badly on purpose just to make her laugh. He had a terrible voice. She used to tease him about it. He would say, "I don't need talent. I'm handsome." She smiled at the memory. Then the smile slowly faded. The hardest part about losing someone isn't always the anger. Sometimes it's remembering the person they used to be. A red light stopped her at an intersection. She looked through the windshield. A young couple stood on the sidewalk holding hands. The woman was laughing. The man looked at her, as if she were the only person in the world. Maria looked away, not because it hurt, because she remembered when that had been her. The traffic light changed. She kept driving. A few minutes later, she pulled into the driveway of the beautiful home she shared with James. The house looked exactly the same. Big, elegant, perfect. But tonight it felt different, like a place she had already outgrown. She stepped out of the car, looked up at the dark windows, then reached into her purse again. Inside was a small flash drive. It looked ordinary, almost unimportant, but it contained copies of years of financial records, important agreements, investment details, everything neatly organized, everything protected. She closed her hand around it. A strange sense of relief washed over her. For the first time in a very long time, she felt prepared. She unlocked the front door, stepped inside, turned on the light. The house was quiet, very quiet. She placed her purse on the table, then slowly looked around. Every picture, every piece of furniture, every memory. She wasn't afraid anymore, because tonight hadn't broken her. It had simply confirmed what her heart had already known. Some relationships end long before people admit they are ending. Up on that rooftop, James was probably still accepting congratulations, probably still feeling victorious, probably still convinced he had control over everything. Maria took a slow breath. Then she whispered, "You have no idea what tomorrow is going to teach you." And for the first time that night, she smiled again. The glass doors closed behind Maria. For several seconds, nobody moved. James stood with his champagne in one hand and the microphone in the other. The smile on his face remained, but it no longer looked as confident. The room had changed. A moment earlier, it had been a celebration. Now it felt uncomfortable. One of the business partners cleared his throat. Another took a long sip of his drink. A woman near the edge of the rooftop quietly put her phone away. Nobody knew whether they should clap or say something. James finally laughed. A short laugh. The kind people use when they realize things have become awkward. "Well," he said, "that could have gone better." A few people forced small laughs. Not because it was funny, because they didn't know what else to do. James handed the microphone to a waiter and raised his glass. "Come on, everybody. Tonight is still a celebration." A few guests lifted their glasses. The energy didn't return, not completely, but James pretended not to notice. He had spent years learning how to move past uncomfortable moments. Business had taught him that. Control the room. Keep smiling. Never look uncertain. One of his friends approached him. "You sure about this?" James nodded immediately. "Absolutely. You didn't mention any of this before." "I wasn't planning to." The man looked toward the elevator, where Maria had disappeared. "That was rough." James shrugged. Better now than later. His friend didn't answer. Instead, he patted James on the shoulder and walked away. That bothered him more than he expected. Another business associate stepped beside him. "Big night." "It is. You closed the deal." "I did." The man looked at him carefully. "And ended your marriage." James laughed again. "You make it sound dramatic." The man didn't laugh. "Isn't it?" For a moment, James said nothing. Then he lifted his drink. "I think some people grow in different directions." The man studied him for another second. Then he simply nodded and left. James took a long drink. The champagne suddenly didn't taste as good. Music started again. Conversations slowly returned. Waiters continued moving through the crowd. The party was trying to become normal again, but something had changed. He could feel it. People looked at him differently. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. Others looked disappointed. He didn't understand why. He had been honest. Wasn't honesty supposed to be a good thing? He slipped his phone from his pocket. No messages. No calls. No angry text from Maria. Nothing. He frowned. He expected something. An argument. A message. Anything. Instead, silence. He put the phone away. A waiter approached. "Another drink, sir?" "Sure." The fresh glass arrived. James took another sip. Then another. The city lights stretched across Biscayne Bay. Usually he loved this view. Tonight it felt strangely empty. He looked toward the elevator again. Still nothing. No dramatic return. No emotional confrontation. No tears. The calmness of her reaction kept replaying in his head. "Congratulations on your victory." Why had she said it like that? It hadn't sounded angry. It hadn't sounded sad. It almost sounded final. He pushed the thought away. A businessman approached and congratulated him on the deal. Another asked questions about future investments. Soon, he was discussing numbers again. Projects. Expansion. New opportunities. This was his world. This was where he felt confident. Within minutes, he was smiling again, talking, laughing, making plans. The discomfort from earlier slowly faded. By the end of the conversation, he felt better, much better. Maybe this had been necessary. Maybe he and Maria had simply reached the end. People changed. Life changed. He wasn't the same man he had been 10 years ago. Neither was she. He convinced himself of it. Then he looked down at his wedding ring. For some reason he twisted it once. Then let go. A waiter announced dessert. The guests moved toward the long table filled with cakes and pastries. The celebration continued. Someone proposed another toast. James lifted his glass. Everyone followed. To new beginnings. The words came out before he had time to think about them. A few people repeated the toast. Others simply drank quietly. James smiled. He felt lighter, freer, as if he had finally made a difficult decision. He checked his phone again. Still nothing. That was strange. Maria always answered, even when they argued, even when she was upset. She always answered. He decided not to think about it. Tonight was supposed to be about winning, and he had won, hadn't he? The biggest deal of his career. New investors. A growing company. A future full of opportunities. Everything he had worked for. He looked around the rooftop. Beautiful lights. Expensive food. Powerful people. This was success. This was the life he wanted. Far below, traffic moved through downtown Miami. People continued with their ordinary evenings. James smiled to himself. Everything was finally coming together. He had no idea that somewhere across the city, the woman he had just humiliated wasn't falling apart. She wasn't crying. She wasn't planning revenge. She wasn't even angry. She was simply moving forward, and she had already prepared for tomorrow, long before tonight arrived. James lifted his glass one final time. He thought he was celebrating the beginning of a better life. He had no idea he was standing at the edge of his greatest loss. James didn't sleep much that night. After the rooftop party ended, he drove home expecting to find Maria waiting for him. Maybe angry, maybe crying, maybe ready to argue. Instead, the house was dark. Her car was in the driveway, but there was no sign of her downstairs. He loosened his tie and stood in the living room for a long moment. The silence felt strange. He wasn't used to noticing silence. Usually he walked into the house while answering emails or taking phone calls. Tonight there was nothing to distract him. He placed his keys on the table. The sound seemed louder than usual. Then his eyes landed on a framed photograph sitting on the bookshelf. It was an old picture. He and Maria were smiling at the camera. They looked younger, happier. The photograph had been taken at a charity fundraiser nearly 8 years earlier, the night they met. James picked it up. For a long time, he simply stared at it. Then, despite everything that had happened tonight, he smiled. Because he remembered every detail of that evening. Every single one. 8 years earlier. Miami. A downtown hotel ballroom. The annual charity fundraiser was one of the biggest social events of the year. Business owners, community leaders, and wealthy donors filled the room. A jazz band played softly near the stage. Waiters carried trays of drinks through the crowd. James almost hadn't attended. He hated events that required small talk and forced smiles, but his father had insisted. Show your face, shake some hands, build relationships. So there he was, a 30-year-old businessman, in an expensive suit, pretending to enjoy himself. He checked his watch, then checked it again. He planned to stay another 30 minutes and leave. Then he saw her, a woman standing beside one of the silent auction tables. She wasn't dressed in anything flashy, no expensive jewelry, no dramatic makeup. Yet somehow she stood out from everyone else in the room. She was laughing. Really laughing. Not the polite kind people used at networking events. The genuine kind. Her whole face lit up. James found himself staring. Then he realized something even stranger. She wasn't talking to anyone important. She was helping an elderly volunteer fix a stack of donation forms that had fallen onto the floor. Most people had walked past. She had stopped, kneeled down, and helped. When she stood up again, she said something that made the volunteer laugh. James couldn't hear the words, but he noticed her smile. And something about it made him smile too. One of his business associates suddenly appeared beside him. "You're staring." James cleared his throat. "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." "I was just looking around." His friend grinned. "Sure you were." James ignored him. But a few seconds later, he looked again. She was still there. Now she was studying one of the auction items. A handmade painting. She looked completely unimpressed by the people surrounding her. She wasn't trying to be noticed. And somehow, that made her impossible to ignore. Without thinking, James walked toward her. Halfway there, he wondered what he was doing. He never approached strangers, especially at events like this, but he kept walking anyway. He stopped beside her. "You planning to bid on that painting?" She glanced at him, then at the painting. "Depends. On what?" "Whether I suddenly become rich in the next 5 minutes." James laughed. She smiled politely and returned her attention to the painting. That was it. No excitement, no recognition, nothing. Most people in Miami's business circles knew exactly who he was. She clearly didn't care. That interested him immediately. "I'm James." She looked at him again. "Nice to meet you." There was another pause. Finally he asked, "And your name?" A small smile appeared. "Maria." "You don't seem impressed." "About what?" He gestured toward himself. She looked confused. Then she laughed. "Oh, what? You expected me to know who you are?" He laughed too. "Maybe a little. Sorry to disappoint you." She extended her hand. "Nice to meet you, James." He shook her hand. It should have been an ordinary moment. Instead, it felt strangely important. "So," he asked, "what brings you here?" "I volunteered." "You volunteered?" She nodded. "I help with the accounting every year." "Accounting?" "Yes. You don't seem excited about it." "I love accounting." "Nobody loves accounting." She laughed. "I do." "That's concerning." She laughed again. The sound made him grin. A few minutes later they were still talking. Then 20. Then 40. James completely forgot about leaving early. They talked about music, family, growing up in Miami, favorite restaurants, bad first jobs, funny childhood memories. The conversation flowed effortlessly. At one point, Maria asked, "So what do you do?" "I work in real estate." "You own buildings?" "Some," she nodded. No surprise, no sudden interest, no change in attitude. He wasn't used to that. Most people reacted differently when they learned he came from money. Maria simply kept talking, as if none of it mattered. And somehow, that mattered to him. Eventually, the band began playing a slower song. Couples started moving toward the dance floor. James looked at Maria. "Do you dance?" She raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me?" "I think I am." "You don't even know me." "I know you love accounting." She laughed. "That's true. And I know you helped someone pick up papers when nobody else did." She looked at him for a moment, then smiled. "You pay attention?" "Sometimes." Another pause. Then she placed her hand in his. "One dance." He smiled. "One dance." A few minutes later they were moving slowly across the ballroom. The music played softly. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Maria looked up at him. "You know something?" "What?" "I almost didn't come tonight." "Really?" "I had a long day and wanted to stay home." "I'm glad you didn't." She smiled. "So am I." Neither of them realized it then, but that simple dance would change both of their lives. Because sometimes the biggest moments don't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes they begin with a laugh and one unexpected conversation. Back in the present, James looked down at the photograph in his hand. He slowly sat on the couch. A strange ache settled in his chest. He remembered that dance. He remembered the way she laughed. He remembered how easy everything felt. For the first time since the rooftop party, he asked himself a question he had been avoiding. When had they stopped being those two people? And why hadn't he noticed it sooner? The old photograph remained in James's hand. He looked at it for another moment before placing it back on the shelf. The smiling couple in that picture felt like strangers, not because he had stopped loving Maria, but because somewhere along the way, life had become crowded with other things. Deadlines, meetings, investors, phone calls, plans, goals. He loosened his tie and walked upstairs. The house was quiet, too quiet. Their bedroom door stood slightly open. A lamp on Maria's side of the room was still on. He frowned. She usually turned it off before bed. He stepped inside. The room looked exactly the same. Her favorite book sat on the nightstand. A sweater rested neatly across the chair near the window. Everything appeared normal, yet something felt different. He couldn't explain it. He changed clothes and sat on the edge of the bed. Sleep wasn't coming anytime soon. So he leaned back and stared at the ceiling. And for reasons he couldn't understand, memories started finding him. Not the big memories, not birthdays, not vacations. The little things, the ordinary things, the things people never realize are important until they stop happening. He remembered the years when he and Maria ate breakfast together almost every morning. She would sit at the kitchen counter drinking coffee while reading something on her tablet. He would complain about traffic before even leaving the house. She used to laugh and say, "You haven't even gotten into the car yet." And he would answer, "I'm preparing myself emotionally." She always laughed. He smiled at the memory. Then the smile slowly faded, because he couldn't remember the last time they had breakfast together. Months? Maybe longer. His thoughts drifted further back. The first years of their marriage had been simple, happy, not perfect, but happy. They spent evenings talking about everything: movies, family, dreams, their future. Sometimes they would order takeout and sit on the floor, simply because neither of them felt like using the dining table. Some nights they danced in the kitchen. No reason, no special occasion. Music would play from someone's phone, and suddenly they were laughing and dancing. Back then, success wasn't the center of his world. Maria was. The marriage was. Their life together was. Then things started changing. Very slowly. So slowly that he barely noticed. His company landed a major contract. Then another. Then another. The business grew. People wanted meetings. More meetings. Then came networking dinners, business trips, weekend conferences. His phone rang constantly. He started waking up and checking emails before saying good morning. At first, Maria understood. She always understood. She encouraged him, supported him, cheered for every success. When he landed his first major commercial project, she baked a cake. A cake. He smiled sadly. Nobody had ever baked him a cake for closing a business deal. Nobody except Maria. The business kept growing, and so did his ambitions. Soon his schedule became impossible. Date nights were postponed, then canceled. Weekend plans disappeared. Conversations became shorter, and without realizing it, he began treating home the same way he treated work. Efficiently. Everything became about solving problems, paying bills, checking schedules, making plans. The romance didn't disappear all at once. It faded quietly. One ordinary day at a time. A memory suddenly came back to him. He had walked into the kitchen one evening. Maria had been cooking dinner. She smiled and asked, "How was your day?" Without looking up from his phone, he answered, "Did the property taxes get paid?" She had gone quiet. At the time, he didn't think anything of it. Now he remembered her expression. The disappointment. The way she slowly turned back toward the stove. He closed his eyes. There had been many moments like that. Far too many. He couldn't remember the last time he had asked her, "How was your day?" The realization bothered him. A lot. Meanwhile, downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed softly. The sound echoed through the house. James looked at the empty side of the bed. He suddenly hated how big the room felt. Months earlier, a Thursday evening, Maria sat alone in the living room. Dinner was ready. Again. She glanced at the clock. 8:15. Then 8:30. Then 9. Her phone finally buzzed. A message from James. Running late. Don't wait up. That was all. No apology. No explanation. No question about her day. Maria read the message twice, then placed the phone down. Dinner grew cold on the table. She stared at the empty chair across from her. Something inside her felt tired. Not angry, not even hurt. Just tired. Because this wasn't unusual anymore. It had become normal. She got up and cleared the table, placed the leftovers in containers, turned off the kitchen light, then stood quietly in the dark. The house suddenly felt very large. A few minutes later, she walked into the home office. The room contained shelves, folders, and filing cabinets. Most people would have found it boring. Maria liked order. She liked knowing where things belonged. She sat at the desk and opened her laptop. Then she began reviewing financial records, investment statements, tax documents, property agreements. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. She simply wanted to understand where they stood. Lately she had been feeling something she couldn't explain. Like she was carrying the marriage by herself. Like she was taking care of everything while slowly becoming invisible. The thought made her uncomfortable. She opened another folder, then another. Hours passed. The more she reviewed, the more she realized something surprising. James didn't really know much about their financial structure anymore. He trusted her with everything, every document, every account, every record. Not because he was careful, because he assumed she would always handle it. She leaned back in her chair. A strange thought crossed her mind. What would happen if one day she wasn't here? The question surprised her. She didn't like it, but she couldn't ignore it either. She stood and walked toward the small safe, hidden inside the office cabinet. Inside were copies of important papers, insurance records, investment documents, property information. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she remembered her grandmother's voice, soft, steady, the same words she had heard since childhood. Never let love make you forget your value. Maria smiled sadly. Her grandmother had never been cynical. She believed deeply in love, but she also believed in wisdom. Love and wisdom belonged together. One should never replace the other. Maria returned to her desk. Then she did something simple. She made copies, not because she planned to leave, not because she expected betrayal, because preparation gave her peace. She organized everything carefully, labeled every file, placed the copies neatly into a folder, then locked the originals away. When she finally finished, she looked at the clock. Almost midnight. James still wasn't home. She turned off the office light, but before leaving the room, she paused. Something inside her whispered that life was changing. She didn't know how. She didn't know why. She only knew one thing. She needed to be prepared. She walked back to the safe, opened it once more, then quietly placed another set of copies inside. The metal door clicked shut, and in that small, ordinary moment, the first steps toward her new life had already begun. Sunlight slipped through the kitchen windows. The smell of butter and syrup filled the house. Pancakes sizzled softly on the stove. Maria stood at the counter, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, her hair pulled back. She looked as though she had slept peacefully. She flipped another pancake onto a plate. Then she poured herself a cup of coffee. The front door opened. A few seconds later, James walked into the kitchen. He stopped, completely stopped. He had expected many things this morning. Tears, an argument, an empty house. What he did not expect was breakfast. Maria looked over her shoulder. "Oh, you're awake." James blinked. You're making pancakes?" She looked at the pan. "That's usually how pancakes start." He stared at her. She looked completely normal, almost cheerful. He slowly pulled out a chair and sat down. Neither of them spoke. Maria placed another pancake onto a plate. Then she glanced at him. "Would you like some?" "What?" "Pancakes." "I heard you." She waited. He looked more confused than angry. Finally he said, "Why are you acting like this?" She turned off the stove. "Like what?" "Normal." She almost smiled. "I'm making breakfast. I announced I wanted to end our marriage last night." "Yes, you did. And you're making pancakes." She nodded. "These things are both true." James rubbed his face. For the first time since coming home, he looked exhausted. Maria walked to the table and placed a plate in front of him. Steam rose from the pancakes. Then she placed a mug of coffee beside it. "Careful," she said. "It's hot." He looked at the coffee, then at her. "Are you angry?" She sat across from him. "I was hurt." The answer surprised him. Past tense. Was, not am, not still. Was, he frowned. You don't seem hurt. Maria took a sip of her coffee. I had several months to make peace with where we were heading. The words settled heavily between them. James stared at her. What does that mean? She set her cup down. It means last night didn't surprise me. You knew I was going to say that? No. She folded her hands on the table. But I knew something had changed. A long time ago. Silence. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. James looked at the plate. I didn't plan to say it in front of everyone. No? He shook his head. I don't know why I did it. She nodded once. Neither of them spoke. Then, unexpectedly, his stomach growled. Maria looked at him. He looked embarrassed. For the first time that morning, she laughed. A small laugh. You should eat. This feels strange. I agree. No. I mean. He looked around the kitchen. I thought we'd be fighting. About pancakes? He almost smiled. No. She cut a small piece from her own pancake. James, I don't have the energy for a fight. He studied her face. There was no anger there, no bitterness. That somehow made him more uncomfortable. You really don't want to argue? She shook her head. No. He leaned back in his chair. That's somehow worse. This time she smiled. A real smile. You always hated silence. I still do. Then eat your breakfast. He looked at the plate again. Finally, he picked up his fork. The first bite surprised him. They're good. They're pancakes. They're really good pancakes. She laughed softly. The sound filled the kitchen. For one brief moment, it felt like old times. Then Maria set down her fork. I'll be moving out. Everything stopped. James looked up. What? I said, I'll be moving out. No. She blinked. No? No, we're not doing that. We? Maria? You can't make a decision like that overnight. She stared at him. Overnight? He opened his mouth, then closed it. She looked almost amused. You think I decided this last night? You just said, I said, I'm moving out. She stood and carried her plate to the sink. I didn't say I made the decision last night. James slowly stood. Hold on. She rinsed the plate. I've already found a place. He froze. You what? I've already packed most of my things. What are you talking about? She turned around. I said I'm moving out. When did you find another place? A while ago. His face changed. A while ago? Yes. You planned this? No. She chose her next words carefully. I prepared. The difference confused him. You prepared to leave me? I prepared in case I needed to. He stared at her. None of this made sense. The woman standing in front of him wasn't heartbroken. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't begging him to stay. She looked ready, and that frightened him more than anger ever could. He took a step closer. Maria, what is happening? She looked at him quietly. Then she said, the same thing that happened to us a long time ago. Silence. You just didn't notice it. He swallowed. This is crazy. No. She shook her head gently. This is overdue. Another long silence. Then she walked back to the table and picked up her coffee. I'll be gone by this afternoon. His eyes widened. This afternoon? Yes. You can't be serious. She looked directly at him. I've never been more serious. James ran a hand through his hair. Everything suddenly felt out of control. Last night, he had ended the marriage. But somehow, this didn't feel like winning. It felt like something else entirely. Then Maria spoke again, calmly, quietly, and with words that made his stomach tighten. There's also something else we need to discuss. He looked at her. What? She took a slow sip of coffee, then set the mug down. Not everything in this house belongs exclusively to you. Silence. James frowned. What does that mean? Maria met his eyes. And for the first time that morning, he realized he had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The smell of coffee still lingered in the kitchen. Sunlight still poured through the windows. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn a few houses away. Everything looked perfectly normal. Except nothing felt normal anymore. James stared at Maria. "Say that again." She folded her arms. "Not everything in this house belongs exclusively to you." He let out a short laugh, not because anything was funny, because he thought he had misunderstood her. "What exactly are you trying to say?" Maria pulled out a chair and sat down again. "Sit." "I'm already standing." "Then stand. But listen." His expression tightened. She looked toward the living room. "I'd rather we have this conversation while we're both calm." "Calm?" he repeated. "You tell me you're moving out, and now you're saying my house isn't completely mine. And you want me calm?" "Our house." "What?" "Our house, James." He blinked. She continued. "You keep saying your house." She didn't raise her voice, didn't sound angry. She simply corrected him, and somehow that made him uncomfortable. He finally sat down. "Fine. Explain." Maria nodded. Then she stood and walked toward the office. A few moments later, she returned carrying a blue folder. James frowned. He had never seen that folder before. She placed it on the table. "What is this?" "Information." She opened it carefully. Several documents rested inside, organized, labeled, neat. That looked exactly like Maria. She slid the first paper toward him. He glanced at it, then frowned again. "This is our investment account." "Yes, I know what that is." "Do you?" He looked up. "Of course I do." "Then tell me whose names are on it." He looked down. His confidence faded. After a few seconds, he said, "Ours." She nodded. "Correct." He looked irritated. "Okay. You've referred to it as your investment account several times over the years." He frowned. "I mean, I funded it." "Partially." He looked up. "What?" She pointed to the document. "Read." He adjusted the paper. "Read the numbers. Then read them again." A small crease appeared between his eyebrows. "What is this?" "My contributions." "You invested this much?" "Over the years, yes." He stared at her. "You never mentioned that." She almost smiled. "You never asked." Silence. She reached for another document. "This one is the rental property account." "I know that property." "Do you know how it's structured?" He frowned again. "Maria, do you?" He looked at the page. "Read quietly," then looked up. "This doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense." "No, this." He stopped talking, then started reading again. His eyes moved slower this time, very slowly, as though he was seeing these papers for the first time. Because he was. "Why are both our names here?" She blinked. "Because we both own it." "No, I bought that property." "We bought that property. I made the down payment, and I managed every financial detail after that." He looked confused. She opened another page. "Read the agreement." He did. The kitchen became quiet. A full minute passed, then another. Finally he looked up. "I don't remember signing this." Maria gave him a look. "You signed every page." "I would remember this." She didn't answer. Instead she pulled another document from the folder. He looked at it, and then another, and another. The more he read, the less confident he became. Because every paper had something in common. His signature. Every single one. A memory suddenly returned to him. Several years ago. A Saturday morning. He had been preparing for a meeting. Maria had walked into the kitchen carrying papers. "Can you sign these?" He hadn't even looked up. "Leave them there." 5 minutes later he had signed everything while drinking coffee. He hadn't read a single page. Another memory followed. An evening before a business trip. She had handed him another stack. "Need your signature." He had signed them while checking emails. Never reading. Never asking questions. Because he trusted her? No. Because he assumed nothing important required his attention. Now those moments came rushing back. He slowly placed the papers on the table. What else is in this folder? Maria's expression didn't change. Quite a bit. He looked at her. You've been keeping all of this? I've been keeping records. You make it sound like an accounting class. That's because accounting is usually less dramatic. Despite himself, he almost laughed. Almost. Then she handed him another document. His expression changed again. This agreement. Yes. He looked at her. I forgot about this. I know. How do you know? Because you forgot about most of them. That hurt. Mostly because it was true. He looked through several pages, then stopped. This clause. Yes. He read it again. Then a third time. This protects you. It protects both of us. But mostly you. She shrugged slightly. Maybe. He looked up. When did this happen? It was always there. You never mentioned it. You never asked. There it was again. Those 4 words. You never asked. For the first time in a very long time, James didn't know what to say. He looked around the kitchen, then back at the documents, then back at Maria. The woman sitting across from him suddenly seemed different. Not because she had changed, because he realized he hadn't been paying attention at all. She had been handling everything, every investment, every account, every record, every detail, and he had simply assumed everything belonged to him because he earned more money. He leaned back slowly. This can't be everything. Maria looked at the folder. No, there are more documents. Yes. How many? She considered the question. Enough. He stared at her, then stood up, walked into the office, opened a cabinet, pulled out files. More files. He searched another drawer, then another. Paper after paper. His movements became quicker, less organized, almost frantic. Maria remained in the kitchen, listening. A few moments later he returned carrying folders. What about these? Those are tax records. He opened another. And these? Insurance information. Another. And this? She glanced at it. Retirement planning. He stared at her. How do you know exactly where everything is? She looked genuinely confused by the question. Because I organized it. He slowly sat down again. For the first time since this conversation started, something unfamiliar appeared in his eyes. Worry. A few seconds later he stood again, walked toward the office, then came back, then left again. The calm, confident businessman from the rooftop party had disappeared. Maria watched quietly. He finally returned, carrying his phone. I'm calling my attorney. She nodded once. He looked at her. You don't seem worried. Should I be? I don't know. His voice rose slightly. He took a breath, then dialed. The call lasted nearly 20 minutes, mostly listening, occasionally asking questions. Each answer seemed to make his face paler. Finally, he lowered the phone. The kitchen became silent. Maria didn't speak. He looked at her, then at the documents, then back at her. What did he say? She already knew, but she waited. James swallowed, then said quietly, He said everything appears to be properly structured. She nodded. He looked miserable. He said you're completely protected. Another silence. He said I signed all of it. Maria said nothing. He said there isn't much I can challenge. The words sounded painful coming out of his mouth. He sat down slowly. For the first time in years, James felt completely unprepared. And for the first time, he realized the quiet woman sitting across from him had been thinking 10 steps ahead all along. The kitchen remained quiet after the phone call. James sat at the table, his phone still in his hand. The screen had already gone dark. He didn't put it away, didn't move, didn't say anything. Across from him, Maria slowly closed the blue folder and placed both hands around her coffee mug. The coffee had gone cold. Neither of them noticed. A few minutes earlier, he had walked into this kitchen believing he understood his life. Now he wasn't sure of anything. He looked at Maria, then at the folder, then back at her again. I don't understand. She waited. Why would you do all this? She frowned slightly. Do what? All of it. He pointed toward the documents, the investments, the agreements, the records, the copies. She looked at the folder, then at him. I managed our finances. No, this is more than that. Her expression softened a little. You think I was planning something, aren't you? No. Then why were you preparing? She let out a slow breath. Because the truth was simple, and sometimes simple truths hurt the most. Because I was paying attention. The answer confused him. What does that mean? It means I noticed things changing. He stared at her. The late nights. Silence. The canceled dinners. Silence. The way you stopped talking to me. His shoulders dropped slightly. The way you answered emails while I was speaking. He looked away. The way every conversation became about work. Her voice never became harsh. That somehow made it harder to hear. You stopped asking me how my day was. Another silence. You stopped noticing things. He swallowed. I was busy. I know. I was trying to build something. I know. Her answers came so quickly that they almost sounded gentle. That made him more frustrated. He stood up, walked to the window, then turned back around. So what? You started preparing for a divorce? No. Then explain it to me because I don't understand. Maria looked at him carefully. You keep saying the same thing. Because I don't understand. She nodded once. Then she spoke quietly. I prepared for uncertainty. He frowned. What? I prepared because I didn't know where we were going. She folded her hands. I didn't wake up one morning and decide our marriage was over. She paused. I watched it slowly disappear. The words settled heavily between them. James looked at her, actually looked at her. There were no tears in her eyes, no anger, only exhaustion, the kind that doesn't happen overnight, the kind that arrives after trying for a long time. He sat back down. When did you start feeling like that? She thought about it, then gave a sad smile. I honestly don't know. He looked surprised. You don't know? No. She shook her head slowly. I think it happened little by little. She glanced around the kitchen. One day, we were talking for hours. A pause. Then one day, we were talking for minutes. Another pause. And then one day we were only talking when something needed to be paid. He lowered his eyes. She wasn't wrong. Not even a little. I thought we were okay. She looked at him for several seconds, then asked quietly, Did you? He didn't answer, because suddenly, he wasn't sure. She continued, James, do you remember my birthday dinner last year? He frowned. Of course. You missed it. His face changed. No. Then he stopped, because he did remember. Or rather, he remembered forgetting. He had promised to leave work early. An investor called. The meeting ran late. By the time he got home, the restaurant reservation was gone. Maria had been sitting on the couch, watching television. She smiled and said it was okay. He never realized it wasn't. You said you understood. I did. She smiled softly. But understanding something doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Silence. Do you remember our anniversary? He looked uncomfortable. Which one? She almost laughed. Exactly. He closed his eyes for a second. This conversation wasn't going where he thought it would. He had expected anger. Instead, she was handing him memories. Small moments, forgotten moments, and somehow, they hurt more. I never meant to hurt you. She nodded. I know. You do? Yes. He looked confused. Then why does it feel like you're punishing me? For the first time, she looked genuinely surprised. Punishing you? All this. He pointed at the documents again. Everything. She stared at him. Then she slowly shook her head. This isn't punishment. Then, What is it? Her answer came immediately. Protection. The word hung in the air. Protection from me? Protection from uncertainty. He leaned back. I still don't understand. Maria looked down at her hands. Then she looked back at him. Preparation isn't revenge. Silence. It isn't betrayal. Silence. It isn't a lack of love. She took a slow breath. It's wisdom. He said nothing. When things started changing between us, I hoped they would get better. A pause. I prayed they would get better. Another pause. I tried to talk to you. She smiled sadly. You are usually too busy. His chest tightened. So I prepared. Her voice remained calm. I made sure I understood every account. I organized every document. I kept copies. I protected myself. She shrugged gently. Because life changes. The room became very still. I never wanted to use any of it. She looked directly into his eyes. I wanted my husband back. Those 5 words hit him harder than anything else she had said. I wanted my husband back. Not more money, not a bigger house, not gifts, just him. He looked away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he asked quietly, when did I become someone you needed protection from? She thought about it, then answered honestly, you didn't. He looked up. What? I wasn't protecting myself from you. She touched the folder. I was protecting myself from being unprepared. Another long silence. Then she stood. I'm going to finish packing. He looked at her immediately. Today? Yes. Maria? She waited. I don't know what to say. A sad little smile appeared. You don't have to say anything. No, I do. He stood. I messed up. She didn't argue. I stopped paying attention. She didn't argue. I took you for granted. She didn't argue. The lack of argument somehow made everything feel more real. He took a step toward her. Please, don't go. Her eyes softened. But she shook her head. I need to. Can't we just talk? We are talking. No, I mean, fix this. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, I've spent a long time trying to fix things by myself. Those words left him speechless, because he knew they were true. She walked toward the stairs. He followed. Maria. She stopped halfway up. I don't know how to do this. She turned around. The man standing below her suddenly looked tired, smaller somehow, not because of money, not because of the documents, because he finally understood that he might actually lose her, and he didn't know what to do with that feeling. Her expression softened again, but only slightly. You'll figure it out. Then she disappeared upstairs. An hour later she came back down carrying 2 suitcases. James stood in the living room. He had not moved much. He looked at the luggage, then at her. This is really happening. She nodded. He swallowed hard. Where are you going? Somewhere peaceful. He almost smiled. That sounds like something you'd say. She smiled too, a very small smile. Then she picked up her purse. Neither of them moved. Finally, she walked toward the front door. She placed her hand on the handle, then stopped. Without turning around, she said, You know something? What? Success isn't dangerous. He frowned. What do you mean? She looked over her shoulder. For a while, I thought your business changed you. A pause. I don't think it did. Then what happened? She gave him one last sad smile. He just forgot what mattered. The words stayed between them. Then she opened the door, walked outside, and closed it gently behind her. Click. The sound seemed louder than it should have. James stood in the middle of the living room. The house suddenly felt enormous. No music. No conversation. No footsteps upstairs. Nothing. For the first time in years, he was completely alone. The front door had been closed for less than a minute. James was still standing in exactly the same spot. He stared at the door, waiting for what he didn't know. Maybe for it to open again. Maybe for Maria to walk back in and say she forgot something. Maybe for this entire morning to make sense. Nothing happened. The house remained quiet. He looked around the living room. Everything looked the same. The sofa, the television, the framed photographs, the lamp near the window. Nothing had changed. Yet somehow everything had changed. He finally moved, walked toward the kitchen. There were still 2 coffee mugs on the table, 2 plates, a bottle of syrup, one chair pushed back, the other neatly tucked in. It looked as though breakfast had simply paused. He stared at the pancakes. Then he sat down. A few minutes ago, Maria had been sitting across from him. Now her chair was empty. He looked at it longer than he meant to. Then he laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because he suddenly realized something ridiculous. He had no idea how to make pancakes. He knew how to negotiate contracts, how to read market reports, how to buy property. But pancakes? No idea. A memory came back. A Sunday morning. Maria standing at the stove. He had walked into the kitchen and said, "One day you have to teach me this." She laughed. "You've been saying that for 3 years. One day." That day never came. He looked at the plate again, then slowly pushed it away. The house felt too quiet to eat. He stood and carried the dishes to the sink, then stopped. He didn't know where the dish soap was. He opened one cabinet. Nothing. Another. Nothing. Third cabinet. There it was. He frowned. How had he lived here for years and never known where the dish soap was? The question bothered him, because suddenly there were many things he didn't know. Where the extra towels were, which drawer held the batteries, how often the air filters were changed, which company serviced the lawn, who scheduled the house repairs. Maria knew all of it. He knew almost none of it. He washed the dishes awkwardly. Water splashed onto his shirt. He sighed. Maria would have laughed at him. Actually, she would have tried not to laugh, which usually made her laugh harder. The thought made him smile. The smile didn't last. He dried his hands and walked into the living room. The silence followed him. He turned on the television, immediately turned it off. The noise felt wrong. He picked up his phone. No messages. He almost called Maria, then stopped. What would he even say? Come back? I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. None of those words felt big enough. He placed the phone down. An hour passed. Then another. The house became stranger by the minute. By afternoon he realized something else. Nobody had texted him asking if he had eaten. Nobody had reminded him about his afternoon meeting. Nobody had asked whether he remembered to pick up his dry cleaning. Maria used to do all those little things he never thought about, until they were gone. By evening, he became hungry. He opened the refrigerator. There were containers neatly labeled. Of course they were labeled. Maria labeled everything. He stared at the food, then closed the refrigerator, opened it again, then finally heated something in the microwave. When he sat down to eat, he automatically looked toward the chair across from him, empty. He hated how quickly he noticed it. He took 2 bites, then put the fork down. Eating alone felt strange. The house felt too large for one person. Night arrived. The sun disappeared. The windows became dark mirrors. He walked upstairs. The bedroom door was open. He stepped inside and stopped. The room felt different, not because furniture was missing, because something else was missing. Her presence, her perfume, her voice, the little sounds she made while getting ready for bed. He walked toward her side of the room. The lamp was gone. A few books were gone. Some clothes were gone. He opened the closet. Half of it was empty. He stared at the empty space, then slowly sat on the edge of the bed. He remembered buying this house. They had walked through every room together. Maria had stood in this bedroom and said, "I like this one. You haven't even seen the rest of the house. I know. You chose this room in 10 seconds. It has good windows." He laughed. "You choose houses based on windows?" "Absolutely." She had smiled, and because she loved this room, he loved it too. Now it felt unfamiliar. He lay back on the bed. The ceiling looked exactly the same. Yet he couldn't remember the last time the two of them had simply lain here talking. Years ago they used to stay awake discussing everything. Dream vacations. Children they hoped to have one day. The kind of old couple they wanted to become. When had they stopped doing that? He honestly couldn't remember. His phone buzzed. A business message. Congratulations again on the deal. He stared at the message, then put the phone down. For the first time, the deal didn't seem very important. Another hour passed. Sleep refused to come. Finally, he got up and wandered through the house. Living room, kitchen, dining room, office. Every room seemed to remind him of something. Maria reading on the couch. Maria laughing in the kitchen. Maria decorating for Christmas. Maria sitting at the dining table with her laptop. She was everywhere and nowhere. As he walked back through the living room, something caught his eye. A small box sitting on the bookshelf. He frowned. He didn't remember seeing it before. He opened it. Inside were photographs. Old photographs. He smiled. Maria loved printed pictures. She said, phones made people forget memories. He picked one up. Then another. Vacation photos. Family cookouts. Birthday dinners. Then he reached the bottom of the box and stopped. It was a photograph of the two of them in the kitchen. He remembered that night immediately. The power had gone out during a storm. There was no television, no internet, no lights. They had found candles and played music on her phone. Then they started dancing. At some point, Maria balanced the phone on the counter and took a picture. The photograph captured both of them laughing, not posing, just laughing. James stared at the picture. A strange ache settled in his chest, because the people in that photograph looked happy, really happy, and he couldn't remember the last time they had looked at each other that way. He sat down on the couch, still holding the picture, and for the first time since Maria walked out of the house, he missed something that had nothing to do with losing money. He missed home. The first thing Maria noticed was the quiet, not the lonely kind. The peaceful kind. She stood on the small porch of the apartment she had rented a few weeks earlier. The morning sun had just begun warming the neighborhood. Somewhere nearby, music played softly from an open window. A dog barked. A car drove past. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something. No late meeting. No unanswered text. No wondering whether James would make it home for dinner. Just morning. Simple, beautiful morning. She smiled. Then she looked at her phone. 3 missed calls. All from James. She stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then placed the phone on the table. Not today. She wasn't angry. She simply wasn't ready. A few minutes later, another message appeared. Can we talk? She read it, then locked her phone. The coffee tasted better after that. A few days later, she drove toward Liberty City. The familiar streets immediately brought back memories. The small stores, the old houses, the churches, the basketball court where neighborhood children still played on weekends. Some things changed, some things didn't, and that comforted her. She parked the car and stepped out. Before she could even close the door, the front door of her family's home swung open. You finally made it, Maria laughed. She hadn't even reached the porch. She was immediately pulled into a hug. Then another. Then another. Questions came from every direction. How have you been? Why haven't you visited more often? You look good. You've lost weight. Are you eating enough? Maria laughed harder. Nothing had changed. Not one thing. Her family still believed every problem could be solved with food and questions. She stepped inside. The house smelled wonderful. Something delicious was cooking. Music played from the kitchen. Laughter echoed through the rooms. For a brief moment, she simply stood there, taking it all in. This was what she had missed. People talking over one another. Someone singing badly in the kitchen. Someone else telling a story too loudly. It felt like stepping back into an old photograph. A familiar voice called out, "There she is." Maria turned. Another hug followed. Then another. She laughed so hard her eyes watered. You all act like I've been gone for 10 years. Sometimes it feels that way. She smiled, then looked around. A table was already being prepared. Food covered nearly every surface. Did everybody cook? The answer came immediately. Of course. She laughed. There's enough food here for 20 people. You never know who might show up. That was true. Someone always showed up. That was how her family worked. Doors stayed open. People came and went. Nobody needed an invitation. A few hours later, everyone gathered around the table. The conversations moved quickly. Stories, jokes, old memories. Maria listened more than she spoke, and nobody pushed her. Nobody asked difficult questions. Nobody asked about her marriage. They simply welcomed her home. That alone felt like healing. At one point, someone looked at her and smiled. It's good to hear your laugh again. She looked surprised. What do you mean? You used to laugh all the time. The comment stayed with her, because she couldn't remember the last time someone had said that. Later that evening, she sat on the back porch with a glass of sweet tea. The sun had almost disappeared. Children laughed somewhere nearby. A car passed with music playing loudly. The neighborhood felt alive. She closed her eyes for a moment and suddenly realized something. She had missed herself. Not just her family, not just this place. Herself, the woman who laughed easily. The woman who spent hours talking on porches. The woman who danced in the kitchen. The woman who loved simple things. Somewhere along the way, she had become so focused on holding her marriage together that she had slowly disappeared inside it. The realization was painful, but it was also freeing, because now she had room to find herself again. The following Sunday, she went to church. The building looked exactly as she remembered. The same wooden doors, the same familiar smiles, the same warmth. As she walked inside, several people greeted her immediately. She spent half the morning hugging people. By the time she sat down, she was already smiling. After the service, conversations filled the parking lot. Nobody seemed to be in a hurry to leave. That had always been one of her favorite things. People stayed, talked, checked on one another, laughed together. She hadn't realized how much she missed that. One woman approached her and smiled. You look peaceful. Maria blinked. Peaceful? Yes. She thought about it, then smiled. Maybe the 1 a.m. The answer surprised even her, because for weeks she had expected sadness, expected grief, expected to feel broken. Instead, she felt lighter. Not every moment, not every day, but enough to notice. She began attending community gatherings again. Small events, neighborhood cookouts, volunteer programs, simple things. She found herself laughing more, talking more, sleeping better. One Saturday afternoon, she helped organize a food drive. At another event, she spent hours catching up with old friends. Life slowly became full again, not because something new had arrived, because she had returned to things she loved. One evening, she sat in her apartment sorting books onto a shelf. Music played softly in the background. She suddenly realized she was humming along. She laughed. She couldn't remember the last time she had done that. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. James. She stared at his name. The room became quiet. Another call. She didn't answer. A third. Still nothing. Finally, the phone stopped. She placed it on the table. A few moments later, another message appeared. I just want to talk. She read the words, then sat down slowly. Part of her wanted to answer. Part of her didn't, because she knew something important. Missing someone and being ready to return to them were not the same thing. She looked around her apartment. The books, the music, the peace. For the first time in a long while, she liked the life she was building. Her phone remained on the table. The message stayed on the screen. She looked at it one last time, then gently turned the phone over and let it ring no more. James called again the next morning. No answer. He tried during lunch. No answer. He tried again before going to bed. Still nothing. The silence on the other end of the phone was beginning to feel personal. Not cruel. Not angry. Just final. He set his phone down on the kitchen counter and looked around. The house was spotless, almost too spotless. No coffee mug sitting in the sink. No book left on the couch. No music playing from another room. Nothing. 3 weeks had passed since Maria moved out. 3 long weeks. And somehow, the house looked less like a home every day. He opened the refrigerator. Half of it was empty. The leftovers Maria had prepared were gone. He closed the door, opened it again, then sighed. He wasn't hungry anyway. Lately, he never seemed hungry. He walked into the living room, sat down, stood up, walked to the window, then back to the couch. He couldn't seem to settle anywhere. His phone buzzed. A business message. Congratulations on another successful quarter. He looked at it for a few seconds, then put the phone down. A few months ago, that message would have made him smile. Now it did nothing. Nothing at all. He looked around the room. There was nobody to share good news with. Nobody to say, "You did it." Nobody to ask, "Should we celebrate?" Nobody. The silence answered him. Work didn't feel the same either. One afternoon he sat in his office looking through reports, numbers, profits, future projections. Normally he loved this part. He enjoyed solving problems, making deals, building something bigger. Today the pages looked meaningless. He leaned back in his chair. The office suddenly felt very small. His phone rang. Another business call. He ignored it. That surprised him. A year ago he would have answered immediately. Now, he let it ring. A knock came at the door. One of his employees stepped inside. "You okay?" James looked up. "Why?" "You've been staring at that report for 20 minutes. He looked down. The report was upside down. He hadn't even noticed. He almost laughed. Almost. "I'm fine." The answer sounded unconvincing. The employee nodded politely and left. James stared at the door after it closed. Then he looked around his office. He spent so much of his life here. Long nights. Weekend meetings. Missed dinners. Canceled vacations. For what? The question came suddenly. For what? He had money, success, recognition, a growing company, everything he once believed he wanted. So why did he feel like he had lost something important? His thoughts drifted back to the rooftop, to the celebration, to that terrible speech. "I think I've outgrown my marriage." He closed his eyes. The words sounded even worse now. At the time, he believed them. Or maybe he wanted to believe them, because it was easier than admitting something else. The truth was far less comfortable. He hadn't outgrown his marriage. He had neglected it. There was a difference. A huge difference. And now he could finally see it. He had been so busy chasing bigger goals that he stopped protecting the life he already had. The realization hit him hard. He opened a desk drawer. Inside was a small notebook. Maria had given it to him years ago. For ideas, she had said. For goals. For dreams. He opened it. Several pages contained business notes, meeting reminders, investment plans. Then he reached the last written page. At the top, in Maria's handwriting, were 6 simple words. "Don't forget to enjoy your life." He stared at the sentence a long time. Then, he slowly closed the notebook. That evening, he went home earlier than usual. The sun was still out. Normally, he wouldn't arrive for another 3 hours. The house looked exactly the same. He hated that. How could everything look the same when everything felt different? He walked into the kitchen, opened a cabinet, then another. He couldn't remember where the coffee filters were. Eventually, he found them. Maria used to make coffee every evening. Not because she needed it. She just liked the smell. He made a cup. It tasted terrible. He poured it into the sink. She would have laughed at him. The thought made him smile. Then the smile disappeared, because he suddenly realized something. Nobody knew him the way Maria did. Nobody. She knew how he liked his coffee. She knew which movies made him cry, even though he denied it. She knew when he was worried before he said a word. She knew when he was pretending to be okay. She knew everything. At work, people knew the businessman. At social events, people knew the successful investor. But Maria knew the man underneath all of it, and he had taken that for granted. He sat at the kitchen table. A painful thought crossed his mind. What if she never came back? The question stayed there, refusing to leave. What if this was it? What if the last breakfast they ever shared was the one where she served him pancakes and said she was moving out? His chest tightened. For the first time, he allowed himself to admit something. He was afraid, not of losing money, not of divorce. He was afraid of losing her. Really losing her. The realization left him sitting there for a long time. Finally, he picked up his phone, opened his messages, typed, "I'm sorry." He erased it, typed again, "Can we talk?" He erased that too. Nothing felt right. Eventually, he typed, "I miss you." He stared at the words, then deleted them. He put the phone down, picked it up again. Finally, he pressed call. The ringing started. 1 ring, 2, 3. No answer. He called again. Nothing. A third time. Still nothing. He lowered the phone. The house seemed even quieter. Then suddenly it rang. He looked at the screen. "Maria?" He answered immediately. "Hello?" A few seconds passed. Then her voice came softly. "Hi." He closed his eyes. Just hearing her voice made something in his chest loosen. "Hi." Silence. Then he said, "Thank you for answering." Another pause. "You're welcome." More silence. Neither of them seemed to know where to begin. Finally he spoke. "I've been trying to call. I know. I didn't want to keep bothering you." A tiny laugh came through the phone. "You called 6 times yesterday." He almost smiled. "Right." Silence again. Then he took a breath. "I owe you an apology." She didn't answer. "I've had a lot of time to think." Still nothing. "I wasn't a very good husband." Her voice finally came. "You weren't a terrible one, either." That answer surprised him. "I wasn't?" "No." She paused. "You just stopped showing up." The words hurt because they were true. "I miss talking to you." Silence. "I miss hearing you laugh." Silence. "I miss us." He waited. Finally, she spoke. "James." "Yeah?" "I'm glad you're thinking about these things." A little hope appeared inside him. "But..." The hope faded. "But what?" Her voice became gentle. "I don't need apologies right now." He frowned. "You don't?" "No." Another pause. Then she said the words that would stay with him for a very long time. "I need actions, not apologies." Silence. He didn't know what to say, because deep down, he knew she was right. And for the first time in his life, James realized that saying sorry might be the easiest part. Actually changing? That would be much harder. The phone call stayed with James. "I need actions, not apologies." He heard those words everywhere. In the shower, driving to work, lying awake at night, sitting alone at the kitchen table. The sentence followed him. At first he didn't know what to do with it. He had spent most of his life solving problems quickly. Business had taught him that. Find the issue, fix it, move on. But this wasn't a contract. It wasn't a deal. There was no meeting he could schedule, and no check he could write. For the first time in a very long time, he had no idea what the next step looked like. One Monday morning, he walked into his office and looked at his calendar. Meetings, calls, lunch with investors, dinner with clients. Every hour was full. A year ago, he would have felt proud. Today, he felt tired. He stared at the schedule for a long time. Then he did something that surprised even him. He canceled his dinner meeting. Then another. Then another. His assistant called almost immediately. "Are you feeling okay?" "Yeah." "You canceled 3 meetings." "I know." A pause. "Should I reschedule them?" James looked out the window. "No." Another pause. "Is everything all right?" He almost said yes. Instead, he answered honestly. "I don't think so." Silence. Then came a careful response. "Do you need anything?" He thought about it. No. But after hanging up, he realized something. He actually did need something. Help. That word made him uncomfortable. He had never been the kind of man who asked for help. Not with business. Not with personal problems. Not with anything. Still, that evening he sat in his car for almost 20 minutes outside an office building. He looked at the entrance, then at his watch, then back at the entrance. He nearly drove away twice. Finally, he took a deep breath and got out of the car. An hour later, he walked back outside. The sun had almost set. He stood beside his car and looked up at the sky. The session had been uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. He had spent most of it answering questions he didn't know how to answer. Questions like, when did work become your identity? Why do you struggle to slow down? When did you stop paying attention to your marriage? He didn't have good answers, but for the first time, he wanted to find them. The changes didn't happen overnight. He still worked, still attended meetings, still managed the company. But slowly, little things began changing. He stopped staying at the office until midnight. He started going home while the sun was still up. At first, he didn't know what to do with all the extra time. One evening, he sat on his back patio for nearly an hour, just sitting. No phone, no laptop, no television. The experience felt strange, then peaceful. Another evening, he opened the kitchen cabinet and finally learned how to make coffee that didn't taste terrible. He actually laughed when he succeeded. A few days later, he found himself standing in the grocery store. For years, Maria had handled almost all of the shopping. Now he was staring at two different kinds of pasta, wondering if there was a difference. A woman nearby noticed his expression. "First time shopping?" He smiled awkwardly. "Is it that obvious?" She laughed. "A little." He laughed too. It felt good, simple, normal. A few weeks later, he noticed something else. He had stopped calling people unless he needed something. That realization bothered him. So one evening, he picked up the phone and called his father. The conversation lasted almost 2 hours. They talked about everything: work, memories, old vacations. Nothing important. Everything important. When the call ended, he sat there smiling. He couldn't remember the last time they had spoken that long. Another night, he called an old friend, then another. He began rebuilding relationships he had allowed to fade. Slowly, quietly, without making announcements about it. He simply started showing up again. Then came another change. One Saturday morning, he drove past a community center. A sign outside mentioned a food program. For some reason, he parked. An hour later, he was helping carry boxes. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody cared. He liked that. The work was simple. Unloading supplies, stacking items, sweeping floors. By the end of the afternoon, his back hurt. He hadn't enjoyed a day that much in a long time. So he came back the next weekend. And the one after that. No photographs. No social media posts. No speeches. Just helping. The strange thing was, he felt lighter afterward. As though he had been carrying something heavy for years without realizing it. One evening, after another session with his therapist, he drove home and stopped at a traffic light. A memory appeared. Maria, dancing in the kitchen, laughing because he couldn't keep rhythm. He smiled. Then another memory. Maria asking him to put his phone away during dinner. Another. Maria asking him to take one weekend off. Another. Maria asking him to come home early. He had said no so many times. Too many times. The traffic light changed. He kept driving. Later that night, he walked through the house. It didn't feel quite as painful anymore. Still lonely, but different. He was beginning to understand something. Healing wasn't dramatic. Change wasn't dramatic either. It happened in small choices. One decision at a time. One better habit at a time. One honest conversation at a time. The following Sunday, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. No message from Maria. He hadn't expected one. Instead, it was a reminder for another therapy session. He smiled. A few months ago, he would have ignored it. Now he looked forward to it. He placed the phone down and walked outside. The evening air was warm. He sat on the patio and watched the sunset. Then his phone rang again. This time, he almost didn't answer, but he did. "Hello?" A familiar voice greeted him. "Hey." He smiled immediately. "Hi." A short pause followed. Then came words he wasn't expecting. "I saw Maria today." He sat up. "You did?" "At a community event." His heart beat a little faster. "How is she?" A soft laugh came through the phone. "She looks good." He smiled, despite himself. "That's nice." There was another pause. Then she mentioned something interesting. "What?" The answer came gently. "She heard you've been changing." Silence. "She did?" "Apparently, people have noticed." James looked out across the yard. He hadn't done any of it for recognition. He certainly hadn't done it hoping news would reach Maria. Yet somehow it had. The voice continued. "She didn't say much." "What did she say?" A small laugh. "Just that she's heard you've been different lately." He looked up at the darkening sky, and for the first time in weeks, a tiny piece of hope returned. 3 days after hearing that Maria knew about the changes in his life, James finally sent her a message. It took him 20 minutes to write, and another 10 to send. The message was simple. "Would you like to have coffee sometime?" No pressure. He stared at the screen after sending it, then placed the phone on the kitchen counter and walked away. 5 minutes later, he came back. No reply. 10 minutes later, he checked again. Still nothing. By evening, he had convinced himself she wasn't going to answer. Then his phone buzzed. He nearly dropped it. The message was short. "Coffee sounds fine." His heart actually skipped. Then he read the second sentence. "As friends." He smiled anyway. At this point, he would have accepted coffee as strangers. The coffee shop sat a few blocks from the water. It was small and quiet. The kind of place Maria liked. James arrived 20 minutes early, then regretted arriving so early. He checked his watch 6 times, checked his phone twice, tried reading a menu he had already memorized. Then the door opened. Maria walked in. She wore jeans and a light sweater. Simple, beautiful. She looked relaxed. For a second he forgot to stand, then quickly got to his feet. "Hi." She smiled. "Hi." A little awkwardness settled between them. Neither seemed to know whether to hug. They settled for smiling. He pulled out a chair. She laughed softly. "You've become polite." "I've always been polite." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not true." He laughed. The sound surprised both of them. It felt normal. They sat. A server came over. They ordered coffee. Then silence arrived. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Finally, James cleared his throat. "You look good." She smiled. "Thank you." "You seem happy." She considered the words. "I think I'm becoming happy again." The answer was honest. It also hurt a little, because he knew she hadn't been happy for a long time. "You look different too," she said. He looked down at himself. "I do? You seem calmer." He smiled. "I think I am." Another silence. Then she looked around the coffee shop. "I used to love places like this." "You still do." "I know." She laughed softly. "I just forgot." He watched her for a moment, then said, "You've been remembering a lot of things lately." She looked back at him. "I have." Their coffee arrived. For a few minutes, they simply drank it. Then, Maria looked at him carefully. "So," he smiled. "So," she laughed. "You still hate uncomfortable conversations." "I always will." "I know." He took a breath. "Ask me anything." She looked surprised. "Anything?" "Anything." She studied him, then asked the question he knew was coming. "Why now?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "The changes." She folded her hands around her cup. "Why now?" He thought about it, long enough that she didn't interrupt. Finally, he answered, "Because I ran out of excuses." She blinked. He looked down at his coffee. "I spent years telling myself I was doing all of this for us." He smiled sadly. "Then one day, I came home and realized there wasn't an us anymore." Silence. He continued. "I had everything I thought I wanted. He looked at her. And I was miserable. Her expression softened. He took another breath. The truth is, he paused. I stopped liking the person I had become. Neither of them spoke. Then Maria said quietly, "That takes courage to admit." He smiled. "I didn't feel courageous." "No, I felt stupid." She laughed. A genuine laugh. And hearing it made him smile. "What?" he asked. She shook her head. "Nothing." "No, tell me. You really do look different." He laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is." The conversation slowly became easier. They talked about books, music, movies they still wanted to watch, a new restaurant she had tried, a terrible recipe he attempted and ruined. She laughed so hard at that story, she had to put down her coffee. "You burned pasta?" "I didn't know that was possible either." "You've become dangerous in the kitchen." "I know." For the first time in a long time, they laughed together. Not forced laughter, real laughter. The kind that made old memories feel close again. Eventually, the conversation slowed. Maria stirred her coffee, then looked up. "I need to ask you something?" "Okay. Do you ever get angry at me?" The question surprised him. "Angry? For leaving?" He stared at her, then slowly shook his head. "No." "You don't?" "No." A long pause. "I think I understand why you left." Her eyes searched his face. "You do?" He nodded. "I didn't before." Another pause. "But I do now." She looked away for a second, as though the answer meant more than she expected. A few moments later she asked, "Do you miss me?" The question was so direct that he almost laughed. Instead he answered honestly, "Every day." Silence. She looked down at her cup. Then, back at him. "I miss you too." The words settled between them. Neither moved. Neither looked away. For a brief moment a coffee shop seemed to disappear. Then Maria smiled softly. "That's dangerous." "What is?" "This." She gestured between them. "What do you mean?" She laughed. "We're having a nice time." He smiled. "I noticed. We used to have nice times all the time." The smile slowly left his face. She wasn't wrong. They had. A quiet settled over the table. This one felt different, heavier, more honest. Finally he spoke. "I've been thinking a lot lately." She waited. "I keep asking myself, when everything started falling apart." She didn't interrupt. He looked out the window, then back at her. And when he spoke again, his voice was quiet. "I didn't lose my marriage overnight." She watched him carefully. He swallowed. "I neglected it, one day at a time." The words hung in the air. He looked down, then added, "One missed dinner." A pause. "One canceled date." Another pause. "One conversation I was too busy to have." He looked back at her. "I didn't wake up one morning and decide to lose you." Silence. "I just kept choosing other things." Maria's eyes softened, because she had waited a long time to hear those words. Not because they fixed anything, but because they were true. And truth, even painful truth, mattered. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then she smiled gently. "You've been doing a lot of thinking." He laughed softly. "Too much?" "No." She shook her head. "Maybe exactly enough." They finished their coffee slowly. Neither seemed in a hurry to leave. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off the water. Inside, two people sat across from one another, still hurt, still uncertain, but talking again. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like a beginning. Their first coffee meeting turned into another one, a week later. Then, another. Neither of them planned it. Neither talked about where things were going. They simply kept talking. Some conversations lasted 30 minutes. Some lasted 2 hours. Sometimes they spoke about serious things. Other times they argued about movies or laughed over old memories. Slowly, the awkwardness between them began to fade. Trust, however, remained careful, like something fragile sitting between them. One Friday evening, They met at the same coffee shop again. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The place was nearly empty. Maria arrived first this time. She sat near the window with a book in her hand. When James walked in, he smiled. "You beat me here." She looked at her watch. "By 4 minutes. You're keeping track?" "I always keep track." He laughed. Some things never changed. He sat down. For a few minutes, they talked about ordinary things. A community event she attended. A terrible television show he had started watching. The fact that he had finally learned how to cook eggs without burning them. Maria looked impressed. "That's progress." "I know. You should put it on your resume." "I might." She laughed. The sound still had the same effect on him. It made the room feel warmer. Eventually the conversation slowed. The rain continued outside. People walked by holding umbrellas. James looked at his coffee for a long time. Maria noticed. "What are you thinking about?" He looked up. "Something important." She waited. He took a slow breath. "I owe you a real apology." Her expression changed slightly. "You already apologized." "No." He shook his head. "I said I was sorry." A pause. "That's not the same thing." She looked at him quietly, then closed her book and set it aside. He noticed the gesture. She was giving him her full attention. Years ago, he might not have realized how meaningful that was. Now he did. He folded his hands together, then unfolded them. He looked nervous. Maria had seen him negotiate million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. Tonight he looked uncomfortable. She almost smiled. Finally he spoke. "When we got married, I promised to protect our relationship." She didn't interrupt. "I promised to choose us." A pause. "I stopped doing that." The rain tapped against the glass. "I got caught up in work." He stopped himself, then shook his head. "No." He looked directly at her. "I chose work." Her eyes softened. That small correction mattered. "I kept telling myself I was doing it for our future." He smiled sadly. "But every time I chose another meeting over dinner." Another pause. "I was making a choice." He swallowed. "Every time I answered emails while you were talking." Another pause. "I was making a choice." He looked down for a moment. "Every time I forgot something important to you." His voice became quieter. "I was making a choice." Silence. He finally looked back at her. "And I kept making those choices, until one day I looked up and realized I had pushed away the person who mattered most." Maria didn't say anything. She could see how hard this was for him, because he wasn't defending himself. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't blaming stress or business or bad timing. He was simply telling the truth. "I hurt you." He took another breath. "I made you feel alone inside our marriage." A long pause. "I made you feel unseen." Another pause. "And I hate that I did that." Maria slowly lowered her eyes, not because she disagreed, because hearing him say it out loud brought back memories she had worked hard to make peace with. He continued. "When you left." He looked around the coffee shop. "I thought I was upset because I was losing my marriage." He shook his head. "It was more than that." A faint smile appeared. "I was losing my best friend." The words settled gently between them. Maria looked up. He smiled sadly. "You knew me better than anyone." He laughed softly. "You even knew when I was pretending to enjoy parties." She smiled. "You hate most parties." "I really do." "You always leave early." "I try to." The tiny bit of humor eased the heaviness for a moment. Then he became serious again. "I miss talking to you." Silence. "I miss laughing with you." Silence. "I miss having someone who understands me without needing an explanation." His voice became quiet. "I miss home." Maria's eyes filled slightly, not with tears, just emotion, because she understood exactly what he meant. Home had never been the house. It had been the life they built together. He looked at her carefully. "I'm not asking you to come back." She looked surprised. "I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight." Another pause. And I'm not asking you to trust me again right now. The honesty in his voice made her sit a little straighter. He smiled softly. I'm simply saying I was wrong. Silence. I failed you. Another pause. I failed us. The words hung there. He didn't rush to fill the silence. Didn't add excuses. Didn't soften the truth. He simply let it exist. Maria looked at him for a long time. Long enough that he started to feel nervous. Finally she spoke. This is different. He blinked. What is? This apology. He waited. She smiled gently. You're not trying to convince me of anything. No, you aren't asking me to fix your guilt. No, she looked at him carefully. You're taking responsibility. He nodded. I am. Another silence followed. Then she leaned back in her chair. I can see you've changed. He didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. He simply listened. I don't think you're pretending. Another pause. I think you're trying. The words meant more to him than he expected. Thank you. She smiled. But he almost laughed. There it is. She laughed too. I still need time. The smile faded from his face. Not because he was disappointed, because he understood. I know. I mean it, James. I know. I care about you. Those words warmed him. But caring about someone and trusting them again are different things. He nodded slowly. I understand. She looked relieved that he didn't argue. I don't want to rush this. You shouldn't. The answer surprised her. You don't? He smiled gently. No. She looked at him for a moment. The old James would have tried to persuade her, would have pushed, would have wanted answers. This version of him simply accepted her honesty. That mattered more than he realized. The rain outside had finally stopped. The coffee shop was nearly empty now. Maria looked through the window, then back at him. You know something? What? I've missed talking to you too. He smiled. Not a big smile. A quiet one. The kind that reaches the eyes. A few minutes later they stood outside. The evening air was cool. Streetlights reflected on the wet sidewalks. Neither seemed eager to leave. Finally James spoke. I had a nice time. She smiled. So did I. Another silence. Then she surprised herself. Would you like to do something next week? He blinked. What kind of something? She thought for a second, then smiled. We used to talk by the water. He smiled immediately. We did. We were always better at conversations there. He laughed softly. That's true. She looked toward the dark sky, then back at him. One evening. He nodded. One evening. She smiled. By the water. And for the first time in a very long while, the future didn't feel quite so impossible anymore. The sun had already begun to set when James arrived. The Miami waterfront glowed with soft orange light. Boats moved slowly in the distance. A warm breeze carried the smell of salt water through the air. People walked along the path. Some jogged. Some held hands. Others simply sat on benches watching the water. James stood near the railing. For the first time in years, he had arrived somewhere early without checking emails while he waited. His phone remained in his pocket. A few minutes later, he heard footsteps. He turned. Maria? She smiled when she saw him. He smiled back. And suddenly he felt nervous, which made absolutely no sense. They had been married. They had shared a life together. Yet somehow, this felt like a first date. You've been here long? She asked. 5 minutes. She laughed. You used to arrive exactly on time. I've changed. I've noticed. He smiled. They started walking. Slowly. No destination. No plan. Just walking beside each other. The sky continued changing colors. For several minutes, neither of them said anything. Surprisingly, the silence felt comfortable. Maria looked toward the water. I forgot how beautiful this place is. You used to bring me here all the time. She smiled. You say that like it was my idea. It was. She laughed. No, it wasn't. He looked at her. It absolutely was. She shook her head. You brought me here on our third date. He stopped walking. Really? Yes. I thought that was your idea. She laughed harder. You don't remember our third date? I remember the date. You don't remember planning it? No. She looked delighted. I planned it. He stared at her. You're serious? She nodded. You called me and said, I have no idea where to take you. He laughed. I said that? You did. Wow. She grinned. I picked this place. He shook his head. I honestly thought it was my idea all these years. She laughed again. He joined her. The sound of their laughter drifted across the water. For a brief moment, they looked exactly like the couple they used to be. Eventually, they reached a bench. They sat down. A boat moved slowly across the bay. Lights began appearing in nearby buildings. Maria leaned back. This is nice. It is. Another comfortable silence settled between them. Then she smiled. You know what I remember most about our early relationship? What? You talked all the time. He looked offended. I still talk. No. She laughed. You used to talk about everything. He smiled. That's true. You would tell me every random thought that entered your mind. He laughed. I had a lot of random thoughts. You still do. They smiled at each other. Then she added, I missed this. What? Talking. He nodded slowly. So did I. The answer came easily. Because it was true. A breeze moved through the palm trees. Somewhere behind them, music played softly from a nearby restaurant. The evening felt peaceful. Eventually, James spoke. I've been thinking about that night. She looked at him. The rooftop? He nodded. Her expression softened. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then she asked quietly, Why? He looked out at the water. Because I still can't believe I said those things. She waited. I thought I had everything figured out. A small laugh escaped him. I really did. You looked pretty confident. He smiled sadly. I was. A long pause followed. Then he spoke again. I thought success meant I was winning. He looked at his hands. I thought getting bigger deals and making more money meant I was building a better life. He slowly shook his head. I didn't understand what I was losing. Maria listened carefully. He looked at her. I stood in that restaurant and celebrated. A pause. And I had no idea what it was costing me. The evening suddenly felt very still. Then he smiled sadly. I celebrated a victory that cost me the best thing in my life. The words settled softly between them. Maria didn't answer immediately, because she could hear how much he meant them. There was no performance in his voice. No attempt to impress her. Just honesty. She looked out at the water, then back at him. He looked different from the man who stood on that rooftop. Lighter, somehow. More present. Less certain of himself. And strangely, that made him seem stronger. She thought about everything that had happened. The pain. The disappointment. The lonely nights. The anger. Then she thought about the last few months. The conversations. The changes. The effort. The honesty. A small smile appeared on her face. James noticed. What? She looked at